Chapter 13. Free wine, good time. His eyes were incredible. He couldn't deny that. His thighs, though, now, they were even more tempting. He kept touching them and had upped the amount of times he made a move on Andy, as he had firmly decided that this was definitely a date, and less of a hookup on a whim. What was uncertain was how Andy felt about him at that moment. It certainly all seemed a little bit sudden, but also felt natural and relaxed. London was weird like that. Sometimes, as a city, it was actually incredibly effective at bringing people together. It could be uncanny in that way, meaning that chance encounters could happen, although extremely rare. Navigating the world of rowing was no easy task, especially when most gay culture defined being gay as late-night parties, fringe art events, and drag events. Not that any of these weren't fun in their own right. They were, and he'd attended a lot of different cultural events and shows. He wasn't part of any scene, and wasn't part of any clique within that. He wasn't even a jog, in his mind. Especially as that would imply physical prowess. While he was a senior rower, and captain of the men's squad at the boat club, it didn't mean he automatically put himself on a pedestal in an athletic context. The world of rowing always looked glamorous to those looking in from the outside, especially with the lycra, the sleek-looking boats gliding through the water. The reality was a lot more everyday than that. Damp changing rooms, musty old boathouse buildings, silty river water, freezing cold mornings along the Thames. It was a lot more textured in an experiential way. Regattas, such as Henley Royal Regatta, with fast university crews, were the epitome of rowing, in a stylistic sense, being places of class, athleticism, and even high culture. Freddy liked this intersectionality and thrived off of the variety it brought to his life, and what it exposed him to. To him, there was nothing better than getting out of a boat onto the silty, wet riverbank, then getting showered and changed, then heading to a formal work event in a crisp, clean environment, entirely removed from the damp and smelly world of rowing. Or heading to a gay event in central London and being amused at the stark difference between the curated world of queer culture and the traditional world of rowing. He stood and waited for Andy to sort the cab out. What was he doing? He thought to himself, as he pushed his head back slightly and breathed in, his chest pressing down and aching slightly from the core workout he had done yesterday evening. His abs were killing. A massage would be ideal, but he doubted whether Andy would do it for him. Perhaps in the morning, if he ordered breakfast for them both. It was inevitable, in his mind at least, that they would be going home together later on. Not solely due to his flat in Richmond being an hour away, at least by public transport, but that he didn't want to let Andy leave his sight. He was incredibly fond of him. He was good at intuiting things and found himself right about the feel of situations. He was certain that this was going somewhere, even if it was nascent. As he opened his eyes again, he heard the clop of Andy's brogues on the damp floor as he approached. First, the aroma of his cologne hit his nose, then he checked himself, looking down at the trousers he'd borrowed from Andy. He didn't typically like borrowing clothes from people, but, in this case, had made an exception as a photography event sounded kind of interesting. Linen shorts wouldn't really work for Sloane Square, so he'd gently asked Andy whether he had trousers he could borrow. The trip back to his flat, then again back to Fulham or Sloane Square, would have taken far too long. This made far more sense, so Andy had agreed that he could borrow something. It felt somewhat intimate borrowing something of his, but actually was a good thing, as it meant he had no choice but to sleep over at his tonight. Whether that meant he could fuck Andy, he wasn't sure. Right now, he wasn't too worried about that. Wanna go in? Andy asked as he approached, placing his left hand on Freddy's torso. The doorway that he was standing under was covered, luckily, thus sheltering the both of them from the lukewarm drizzle falling sparingly. Just a minute, he responded, both hands reaching for Andy's chin, grabbing it gently and pulling him in for a kiss. That stubble. Again, it was intoxicating. His tongue gently nudged Andy's as they made out softly in the rain, the smell of Chanel bleu and wet pavement stones hitting his nose. It wasn't a rising damp that he was used to from the ancient rowing club infrastructure, but a more urban wetness. The smell of Andy's trench coat, the smell of wet leather, of wet foundation emanating from his skin. He looked into his eyes again, smiling slightly, then pressed his forehead and nose directly against Andy's wet skin. He could have stayed in that doorway for hours, but didn't want to look too desperate, so he withdrew slightly. How long do you usually stay at these things? Assuming there'll be wine, right? He inquired, not urgently, but with vulnerability, to try to express to Andy that he'd be happy to head home at any point. It wasn't a leading question, but did imply that he might possibly be uncomfortable at times. He was in Andy's hands, but did hate social events sometimes and wanted to make sure he was looked after properly. About an hour or so. Don't worry, I'll look after you. Sometimes you get mad types who cling on to you, especially if they see you're gay or a photographer too. Alright, I'm placing my trust in you. I'm in your hands, Andy. If I end up needing to be rescued, don't ignore me. He chuckled as he said this, and briefly touched his arse, though he wasn't sure whether that was too flirty, so it was only a light touch. As they approached the door, Andy led the way into the venue and chatted to the host at the side before grabbing 2 glasses of cheap wine and handing one to him. It was the short, stubby sort of wine glass, typically from outside catering companies who knew their clients were more likely to drop the more expensive glassware. This told immediately who was going to be in attendance. Preppy but careless, and perhaps mostly mid-20s corporate types who didn't really come for the wine, but counted the cost saving as an aggregate each time they took advantage of the free alcohol. In short, genius, faux wine mathematicians who were experts in calculating the cost of a bottle of wine at a nearby bar, and figuring out how many more they could afford that evening if they took full and proper advantage of the complimentary wine. He gave Andy a knowing smile and raised his eyebrows as he swallowed half a glass of cheap plonk. The silent agreement from Andy confirmed that this wasn't the highbrow photography event that he'd promised it to be, and was most probably going to be insecure 20-somethings who knew nothing about photography.